Grasshopper here. Welcome to the Cliffside Bunker in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. And this is part one of a mini series I'm beginning. It's all about how you can build your own Axe & Allies custom game table like the one I'm about to build. So I'm very excited, very happy to be in my new apartment, guys. And ironically, I didn't mean for this to happen, but it ended up being in my old neighborhood, Cliffside. So we are at the new Cliffside Bunker, and I'm about to build a new custom game table. Calling this game table Omaha Beach. Anybody that has seen videos on my channel in the past have seen the type of game tabletops that I like to build. So I also in the past got many questions, you know, what type of wood, what are the dimensions, how did you build that? I really want my own. So I just figured, hey, if I'm gonna build this, I'm gonna go step-by-step video footage to help you guys build your own. And I've got to tell you, you do not need to be a master carpenter, guys, to do this. I have experience building these types of tabletops before, so I'm confident. But I want you to be confident too. I want to show you step by step how to do it yourself. You don't need a lot of carpenter skills, trust me. Now, it helps that you have the right materials as well. You guys are going to have ideas of your own techniques. I'm going off of my experience, what I did on my old tables, you know, what I wish I did on my old tables, and you can learn from my experience just by watching the tutorial series. So I'm not going to get too much into the materials that you see right here, right now. When I shoot clips, putting things together, I will explain in more detail. Even the cost points, obviously we're dealing with Canadian currency up here, but just an idea of the costs that you might endure. All right, so I have what I need to get started. Obviously, when it comes to the final product, there's like a beginning, middle, and an end. So just going to build the foundation right now, the tabletop, and we'll go from there. All right, so I've got some milk crates. I got some mats. I'll show you what I'm going to do with those later. My old stools from my old table. Good to see them again. And even got my old 4x4 table legs. Going to sand them down and things like that. Got some sanding paper. Some screws, some tools, some stain. Need a drill, of course. And again, we'll get into more detail about the things that you see when we get using them. Alright guys, we're back, and I've gotten started building my custom Axe & Allies game table. I'm going to call this Omaha Beach. I've laid out my plywood on top of my milk crates. That's going to act as a makeshift table or table legs while I build the foundation of this table. So instead of going step by step about how you should do things, I'm just going to explain my thought process in my steps and why I do them. Like I said, a lot of your techniques, way you do things, your troubleshooting and problem solving are going to be different than mine. But when I make a tabletop, I go and think about levels. Like for example, I've got here a 2x4 bank that I'm going to use as the bank of the table. Another one's going to go this way. And that's going to create a sunken level in the center. So right away, we've got our main level. Now, we're going to start filling in these trays. I've got a loose layout here for measurements. So I've not fastened anything down. I've not screwed or glued or anything like that. You want to do this to get as many measurements as you can. Last thing you want to do is try and correct an error by unfastening things and unscrewing things. So try and look and see where your flaws are before you start to get into drilling. The only thing I've got fastened here is my bank to this foundation. I'm using a C-clamp. So in the description box of this video, I'm going to provide a link going to axeandallies.org where you will be sent to a thread where it will describe in great detail the items that I'm showing you, the items that I use for the table, and what they cost me, okay? And you can see that I've got other things purchased here, and as I bring them into the video tutorial, I'm going to direct you to the thread where you can see everything that I'm going to actually use. There's been a couple of things in my last clip that I actually returned because after laying this out and thinking about it, I got some better solutions. So this here are my carpet mats. I'm going to use these as the surface for my dice trays. So you'll see just how it comes together in the end, but the problem with this particular carpet I got from the dollar store is that it's quite thick. It's thicker than the last carpet piece that I used on a previous table. Now before, I was able to just put the 2x4 bank right across on top of this and just drill right in and it wouldn't be a problem. But because this is higher, what happens is this is not flush. So those are the types of things and details you're going to notice, and you need to come up with solutions. Now, I did have some laminate tiles, and what I used to do in the past is put laminate tiles sticky with the peel back, and you stick it right on 1 foot by 1 foot. You don't want to leave this like this plywood. It's very, very strong, very sturdy, nice and thick, great foundation, heavy, but you don't want to leave it like this, the surface, because it's rough. You might get a sliver. So we're going to cover all of this plywood, and some of it's going to be covered with this mat, and some is going to be covered with this MDF board you can see here. So I got some MDF board cut to fashion on top of this to create this surface surrounding this surface, and what it's going to do is it's going to allow the whole surface now to be flush, to be level, so that when we put that bank across, it's going to be flush with this, okay? And you'll see in the end result. But that's the kind of thinking process to solve the problems. And again, I do have experience with building tables like this, so I know the kind of issues I'm going to run into. All right, we'll get into these later, but I just wanted to show you the basic first initial levels. And again, if you take a look, we've got a level right here, right? It would be nice if this was flush, and we may have another solution for that later. This is all what's gonna make the table really, really nice. So, like I said, I have these clamped, these pieces here. I didn't want this to move or slide around while I was doing measurements, very important, because a lot of measurements are done in between this way and this way. Now, take a look at my plywood board here. I had it cut, pre-cut. So this was an 8x4 plywood, 3/4 thick. 8x4, 3/4 thick. And to save myself the trouble of bringing it down the stairs here and save myself the trouble of transporting it here, I just had to cut it right in half. And that's why we got this seam here. It's not a big issue. Okay, and I'll show you why step by step, but right now we're gonna clamp this bank to this. There you can see the seam right there. Remember, we always want to have something, a piece of wood, or this is a hard tile sample, right? So that we don't have this C-clamp digging into your soft wood. This here is knotted pine. It's kind of soft, right? But we'll talk more about that in a different clip. So just laying it out, getting all the measurements I can, I realized by looking at it that I needed to raise the level of the entire foundation to make flush with this mat. I really like this mat. It's going to be beautiful for rolling dice on. and you'll see how that comes together. Alright guys, I realize this is going to be a long video, but you know what, I mean, this will probably be the last custom game table I ever build, and it'll be nice to have chronicles of, you know, how I came up with it. Okay, just a short little clip to show you guys what I've done. So I've taken off all the trays and the banks, the 2x4 banks. We got a blank canvas now. However, before we took those C-clamps off, remember? Before we took the C-clamps off, I've got my foundation plywood into 2 pieces. I took an 8x4 and cut it into 2 pieces of 4x4, 4 feet, 4 feet. Now I joined it with a bracket here with 2 screws, simple joiner bracket. Right here is the seam. Did the same on the other side, and underneath on the bottom I put one here in the middle and another one. Now this is going to be a temporary solution just to keep this. You can see that I've got a milk crate underneath there, so nothing's gonna come down. But it's important that we join that flush. We're gonna do all of our work on the top. Make sure that it's nice and flush, and these brackets do a great job. Now before I put down the MDF board, which is my next step, I want to make sure that just got a clean surface. I'm going to be using carpenter's glue, so just take a simple dollar store brush. Make sure that your surface is clean. You don't have to go so far as to sand it. We're never going to be looking at this surface, especially when we glue our MDF board down, but we want to make sure that we always have a clean surface. Do every step as thoughtful as possible. Alright guys, so I've started to put my MDF board on top of the plywood foundation, and I'll show you a few techniques, but first I want to remind you guys, if you go and get cuts done at the building supply store, make sure that your measurements are accurate, because once it's cut and once you bring it home, you can't take it back. You can't even get them to give you another cut on a previously purchased piece. So make sure all your cuts are done. So I've done that here with my MDF. I had a plan and I got it cut into 4 different squares, also easy to transport in a vehicle. Now this end is where I started. I clamped this to the plywood, this one piece. This is where it is cut. You can't see the seam because it's nice and flush, but I clamped this. However, I glued this piece. Now we're using carpenter's glue. Okay, and that's on our list in the forum thread of things to purchase. Now you may have your own techniques and your own solutions for things, but I'll just go through the thinking and mindset of why I did things this way. Now if you take a look here, got my MDF board, it's glued, this whole sheet is glued. And the reason why I clamped this one is to give me this edge, so that once the glue is on this sheet, I don't have to mess around with making sure it's flush. I know that this is flush, therefore I can just bring this into the edge. All right, now the first couple minutes it's going to slide around, so you don't want too much movement on it. You want to let it set a little bit, and then once it's done that, you just put a little pressure, go over it like so. Make sure it's nice and connected and joined with the plywood. If it lifts in any different corner or anything, don't worry about it. This is a temporary solution. Obviously, once the banks, the 2x4 banks come down, we're going to screw through the bottom, through the 3/4 inch plywood, through the MDF and into the bank. So that's going to be the more permanent fasten. Now, the reason why I clamped this is because we're going to modify this end piece, but this one can be glued down. We're going to do the same at this end. So this piece will get clamped down, and this piece here will get glued. Once I clamp this, I'll slide it with the glue on, fasten it nicely, and do the same on this end as I did over here. Like I said, I did not glue the end because we got to modify it. Remember, we're going to put our dice tray mat. We're gonna do all of our measurements. We're gonna get the trays back out here. You know, we're probably going to stain the banks, but this needs to be done before the banks go down. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna score it with a knife, this MDF board. And again, scoring it very, very carefully, breaking it off so that we glue one piece over here, one piece over here, and then remember in our previous clip, this falls right into its own level, creating a nice flush with the MDF board seamlessly into the carpet top. And we're going to do that with both sides. Seems like a lot of work to go through, but you know, you'll see when it's done how important it is that that mat is sunken in and flush. It's going to affect everything, the banks, the piece of wood in the center that's going to hold the map, things like that. So next, after, we're going to stain our 2x4 banks. So the next clip, when I come back, we'll have the ends cut out with our placemat sunken down. Same over here on this side. And here's our stain. We're gonna start making that wood beautiful and putting the banks around the table. And then we'll continue from there. Okay guys, in this clip I want to show you all my progress so far. So before I show you the tabletop and where we're at, I'm gonna swing around and show you this. Take a look. I opened the pail of wood stain and I stained all my banks. Now I sanded them first. You want to sand first so that you create a nice grain, a nice groove, so that that wood stain can penetrate into the wood. All right, now you don't have to go crazy when you sand. I have a medium sandpaper. I go over it, you know, gently, but enough where something's coming off. Now, you want to be careful on these 2x4s that you don't sand these edges. Don't wrap the sandpaper around and do that, okay? Just do the top and then the side, but not around. You don't want to round these nice edges off, okay? So it's hard to pick a good stain because it's never quite the color that you see on the pail, but I'm happy with it. It's a little orangey, but it's bringing out the wood quite nicely. Staining the banks and staining the wood on the table is something that I didn't do in my last table that I really wanted to do this time. It was a lot of work, but I'm glad that I did it. Now, where are we at on the table? Remember in my last clip, talked to you about levels. I really like and want this type of carpet mat for my dice tray. It was a little thick. I don't like the way that it was rising up, so I wanted to make it flush, and you'll see why once the banks go down. So I used an MDF board. Now this is a step that you guys don't necessarily have to go through. This is something that I'm doing. It's more work, but I'm okay with it, just to make sure that my mat that I want to use is flush. Now in the past I never used this. I just put down a thinner carpet and just put banks over it and it was fine. But I glued everything down using carpenter's glue. Glued down all these pieces here. Even glued this down. I don't want anything moving while I'm working. So I've put down one of the banks. It's an 8-foot bank. You see that I've got it C-clamped. I'm getting ready to drill, getting ready to screw the bank into the wood. Now, before I do, I put one bank down and I check to make sure that everything is perfectly flush, that I'm happy with the alignment on this side anyways. Just want to get this side right. Now you can see here that there's a little overhang. That's fine. Stuff like that's gonna happen. This piece is not the important piece. This is the important piece. So we're not gonna cut this down to match this. We're not gonna extend this to match this. Just let it overhang, it's fine. So little tiny things like that are gonna happen. All right. Now this is the next step. The next step, I'm going to screw down the bank on the right hand side. That's going to be my base. The other bank can be adjusted according, because we're going to measure to make sure that it's all the same width all the way across. But once we got this side perfectly aligned with the side of the plywood underneath, the other side can be adjusted according to our measurements, all right? So we're gonna get that one screwed in, and we'll be back to show you how it looks afterwards. Okay. All right, everybody, this is where we're at in the process. Just a little update video. I wanna show you something. So came home late from work. I was excited to continue my table. I was screwing in the banks and I had to cut the pieces at the end, and I made a boo-boo. So from the time I measured, I had 41 3/8. I measured it 3 times, but for some reason when I got to the cutting board and made that cut, it became 40 3/8. So you can make mistakes like that. That was a big one. I went through a lot of work sanding and staining these boards. Now I had to go out and get another replacement board. Now many of you might think, well, you know, it's no big deal, just put in some sort of filler, you know, maybe take a piece of this and slide it in there and, you know, you're fine. But when I'm putting this much money and this much effort into the table, I don't want these flaws to be reminding me year after year about that miscut. So I'd rather just go to the building supply store, pick up another $16 piece of wood and do it properly. So I just wanted to show you this. I have sanded this and I'm about to stain it. This is, again, I called this knotted pine from Home Depot. Really beautiful piece of wood. It's got some nice grain, some knots. It's smooth, relatively smooth. You don't get slivers from it straight away, but you still want to sand it and stain it. Now, obviously I didn't need an 8-foot piece, but that's all they had. Comes in 4 feet, 6 feet, and 8 feet, but 8 feet's all they had. But after looking at it, I'm like, this is a really, really nice 8-foot piece. I might stain it and swap it out for the 8-foot piece on this side and cut that one down to make my end. You can see that I'm using these for some framing around the trays and whatnot. So just a little update to let you know that mistakes can happen. I encourage you to just, you know, don't do a simple makeshift time-saving solution when you can just put the work in to do it over again and get it done right. Your effort deserves it. All right, guys, just a short little update clip. I was pretty sad to see that I did that, but I was tired after work and I made a boo-boo. That's okay, we'll fix it and we'll triple check the measurements next time. Okay, be back. All right, guys, so very cool moment here. I've got my banks sanded, stained, and screwed into the 8x4 plywood foundation. Looks very nice, looks very clean, very happy. You know, there's a few tiny flaws, but you're gonna get that. You're never gonna build a perfect table, but very happy with the way that it looks. You can see how all the steps and the planning and the vision of getting to this point with the MDF board, with the carpet mats, with the banks going over top of the MDF board and the carpet mats. Now, when screwing in, I'll just give you a little bit of a tutorial of what I do when I screw my banks in. I get underneath the table, of course, and I screw 2 holes from the bottom up. Of course, I'm using a screw that's not too long. Of course, you don't want it to come up through the bank. So I have here 1.5 inches. 1.5 inches wood screws, of course. So many different kind of screws out there. You want to make sure you just get wood screws. You want a drill, and you want a proper bit. I got a Robinson head bit, which is perfect for the ends of these. Now, I brought this out because I want to show you when I'm underneath the table and I'm drilling from the bottom up, you can't see the edge. The last thing you want is a screw to come up and miss the board like that. So underneath, if I put a card like this underneath and I put my screw on the edge of that card, I know that I'm not going to miss. I actually have this much room. And the reason why you want to put one on this edge and one on this edge is because if you just go nonchalantly, just la-di-da, screw them in, and it doesn't really matter to you, if they all end up being along this half, then underneath here that edge is going to lift because all the pressure is being compressed on this side. It's going to lift this. So that's why you want 2 screws, one on this half, one on this half. Now, I don't recommend you doing them directly across from each other. I stagger them. I put one here and then I put one here. The reason being is if there's a small crack underneath, by drilling a screw in, there's a small crack that is happening inside the wood that you can't see. You're not going to extend that crack by putting another screw directly right across it. So you stagger them, one on this half, one on this half. All right. Now I don't mind using a lot of screws, so I go 2 there, 2 there, 2 there, 2 there, 2 there, 2 there. It might seem like overkill, but I don't want any gaps. I don't want any gaps lifting up the board. So very happy with how tight these banks have created these corners. And like I said, very tight, very flush to the MDF board. Like I said, I used a lot of screws. So very happy with how Omaha Beach is turning out. Now for the next step. You remember in an earlier clip of this video where I talked about the levels of these trays. I'll get into these trays and where I got them in a later video, but so might not be a big deal to many of you that, you know, these trays are a little bit lower than the bank. You can see that. I kind of want to raise them, make them flush. Reason being is I want everything to feel and look like it has a purpose, looks like it belonged, and it all comes together like different body parts to form one perfect table. So what I'm going to do actually to lift that, or lift all those trays up, I got some laminate tile. Now, I thought I was going to return these, but actually ended up finding a use for them after all. What I did is I ended up scoring them very carefully, measured and scored them with a box cutter. Wolfen knife. And I'm going to take the backs off these and just one after another, after another, after another. Now, what that's gonna do is not only is it going to provide a slight lift for the trays, slight, it's gonna have allow for a very beautiful smooth bottom underneath the tray. Okay, we only want to lift the trays themselves, and we'll get into framing in a different clip, but that's what my next step is. Be right back. Alright, I just laid down my laminate tile. So I modified them by cutting them, by scoring them. These tiles are 1 foot by 1 foot. They cost just under $2 a piece. And the reason why I picked this color is I thought that the stain was going to be a darker color. The stain ended up looking like a orange red type. I thought it was going to be darker. If you saw the picture on the side of the pail, it was very, very close to these tiles, but that's okay. I'm alright with the way it turned out. We're not going to see these tiles much because the trays will be on top of them. So let's lay out the trays, show you what it's going to look like. Alright, so we've laid the trays back down on the table, and we're going to now get into some framing. What is framing? Well, take a look at the side of the trays. You see, some of them are uneven. They were handmade. They're not all identical. They all got their little flaws. But we don't want to see all these creases on the side of these trays. We're going to frame it with these pieces that we've already sanded and stained earlier. And I'm going to do some cutting with a handsaw. So far, all of my cutting of the banks and these pieces here have been with a handsaw. Of course, the plywood and the MDF I had cut at the building depot. So let's see how it's going to look when I get done. And I'm going to make sure I measure correctly. The framing is important, so be right back. Alright, so the framing is finished. I'm so happy it worked out beautiful. Very happy with the way that the framing looks. So we used 6-foot pieces of 1 inch on this side and again on that side. We didn't have to cut it. It measured exactly 6 feet, so we did not cut these pieces. So we went ahead and started cutting these pieces, the 2-inch portion of the frame. Now I had an 8-foot piece, and after I cut this piece and these 2 pieces, and again over here, I used every single millimeter. It was amazing. 8 feet was exactly what was needed. Not a millimeter too large, not a millimeter too small. And the last piece that I had after all my cuts, I just slid it right in there. Is the perfect size. I'm going to call that a blessing. So our dice tray is encompassed there within our frame. And again, over here our trays are encompassed. You know, that beautiful piece extending all the way across. Now the last few steps before I move on to the next part of the process, we're going to take these L brackets and we're going to spot them along here. And we're going to put the L brackets here coming out into the inside. We don't want the trays sitting on top of any L bracket. So the L brackets going this way. If you're worried that they might look a little bit, little too much hardware, don't worry. One of the last pieces we're going to put right in the center is a 1/2 inch piece of plywood. It's going to cover these, but it's not going to be so high that it covers the whole bank, that beautiful bank, but it will be high enough. there where we can maybe cover most of the bracket, but it needs to be fastened to the table. That's why we're going to use those brackets. There's other things, guys, as far as the tabletop, like the abacus and other things that are more cosmetic, more detail, that we're going to get into the last portion of this process. But for now, we've got the brackets to put on our frame and a 1/2 inch piece of plywood we're going to drop right in the center there. It's going to cover this. It's going to cover this. It's going to come straight to here. Now my measurement inside of this frame where the mat belongs is 71 by 32. Now I'm very accustomed in the past to printing 72 by 33 maps. This is going to be 71 by 32. That's just the way it went. My trays are bigger. I really wanted the wood framing, so I sacrificed an inch off the map so I could have the beautiful wood framing. All right, and that's those are the last couple of steps before I flip this and start going with the legs. Now, before I sign off here, this is part 1 of a mini-series chronicling the process of me building my table, Omaha Beach. And in the next episode, we're going to flip this and I'm going to show you how I put on the legs and the foundation, the bottom. But for now, this is part 1, the beginning. And I'm happy so far. Looks great. And I am going to Christian my dice trays. I'm all alone. I'm not going to make a big ceremony out of it, but it is my table. I'm building it with my own bare hands. I feel like now that the dice tray is encompassed, I am going to throw the first dice. Here is the first dice. I don't care what it comes up. I really don't. 6, 5, 3, 1. I'm going to be the first to roll in the southern portion of Omaha Beach. This is the south end of the beach. And I get a 1. Oh, oh, we're halfway to a beautiful thing. All right, let's go down to the other end. All right, maybe I lied when I said I didn't care what I rolled. All right, the north end of Omaha Beach. The north end of the beach. I'm going to be the first to roll in my encompassed dice trays. Here we go. Are you freaking kidding me? May all your rolls be 1s. Are you freaking kidding me? Well, after what I just told you about the 8-foot piece of wood, and now I just rolled snake eyes. The very first dice that I rolled on my table. I'm getting emotional here, guys. Rolled snake eyes. Praise God. Praise God. All right, guys. Thank you. Thank you very much for, just being interested, and thank you for watching. I'm going to sign off now. Look out for the next episode. Can't believe I rolled snake eyes on my table. First 2 dice. Wow. Okay, thanks for watching, guys. Check out the next episode. This is part 1, the beginning. Episode 2, the middle, is coming up. Cheers.